This is ODAT Chat, your instant connection to recovery and community, one day at a time. This podcast may contain strong language, sexual content, and spiritual truth. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to ODAT Chat, where we talk about how to stay sober one day at a time. My name is Arlena, and I'll be your host. If you're new here, this is a podcast where my guests and I talk about how to recover from alcoholism and drug addiction, and other addictions too. We typically spend the first half of the podcast on what happened and what it was like and how they were able to break free from addiction, and the rest of the time we try to focus on solutions and teachings that help contribute to long-term sobriety. ODAT Chat is now being downloaded in 33 countries. It just blows my mind. The message of hope and recovery is reaching places like South Africa, Australia, Russia, Ireland, and Japan. We're in Japan. I have been getting emails and notes through social media from people who feel, really lost and alone, but if only for a moment, they feel hopeful and connected through the stories that they hear from our courageous guests. I just want to say thank you with all my heart to all the guests, past and future, for being willing to share your experiences and really be vulnerable so that others might recognize themselves and realize that they can recover too. ODAT Chat is funded by generous listeners like you, so if this message is important to you and you'd like to help keep it rolling, please consider a $5 monthly membership. There are two ways to do so. Just visit odatchat.com and you will see a donation button and a Patreon button on the right. So thank you so much for your support. Today I have a special guest, Larry Ruhl. Larry is the author of a new and very powerful memoir called Breaking the Ruhls. In it, he tells the story of childhood trauma and sexual abuse, which led to alcoholism, addiction, and depression. I'm sure among other things. Larry has now found recovery and healing and is here with us today to share his courageous and inspiring story. So Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Arlena. It's a pleasure to be here.
So typically what we do is we cover a little bit about your past. It's very common to talk about experience, strength, and hope. So do you mind sharing maybe 5-10 minutes on what it was like, what happened, and how you found recovery?
Absolutely. That sounds great. I was sort of a late starter in drinking. I didn't really get drunk for the first time till I was 19. And it was with a cheap bottle of wine, and I didn't think much of it. And then I moved to New York City to attend college and discovered, of course, that I was welcome in any bar without being carded or asked for ID.
Wow.
And I definitely drank heavily living in the city and getting into bars. But I always chalked it up to the college experience. I'd never, ever second-guessed it, even when I acted out. And, in one case, got into an altercation with my roommate at the time and, terrible hangovers. I never thought anything of it. Alcoholism certainly ran in my family. My family on my father's side, one of my great uncles was literally the town drunk. My grandmother was an alcoholic, and it ran deep on that side of the family. My mother also struggled with alcohol. But I ignored all of those things and went about my way. And, many years drank in fits and starts, sometimes too much and sometimes it all felt manageable. But as I started getting into recovery from what happened to me in my childhood, with my therapist, I used alcohol much differently. I used it to numb, I used it to check out and to really disappear. And it took on a life of its own. I always considered myself a sophisticated drinker because I drank martinis in Manhattan. And, I was stellar at not losing a drop. And as I started to sort of feel better in coming to terms with what happened over a course of many, many years, my addiction to alcohol, my alcoholism took on a life of its own. And I found myself in that classic way of keeping a secret stash in my basement and having an entire separate bar set up down there that was hidden from my partner at the time. And I got very smart in how I consumed to a blackout state every night.
Wow.
He never knew what I was doing when he and I did a shot at the end of the day to toast the end of a day. You know, I waited for the creak of the stairs until he was out of sight, and I poured myself glassfuls of gin. Gin was my weakness. It became my best friend. Mm-hmm. And what I discovered was drinking it warm out of the bottle. It hit me faster. And, you know, I had heard rumblings of AA. I have friends in recovery, and I always said that I was not one of those people. And, you know, I was just not going to be one of those people. And I very much felt and believed that if you had happened what happened to me as a kid, you would drink this way too.
Right.
So I was, I finally, you know, was alone in the city with 2 bottles of booze for 2 nights, and woke up and understood very clearly that I had a problem, and a very significant one, and turned to a friend who had been sober for 3 years, and asked for help. And, you know, I got that help. And, you know, for me, being sober is what allowed me to even contemplate telling my story and writing my book. There's no way that I could have done that had I not gotten sober. And you know, my sobriety is a matter of life and death for me. Right. You know, it's a classic case. And that's pretty much the roundabout version of what my story has been around alcoholism.
That's really interesting. I was just curious about, I mean, when you look back on when you first started, you talked about being a late bloomer. Why do you think you waited so long to start drinking?
You know, I think that's such a great question. You know, I think certainly seeing my mother so out of control when she got drunk was a big part of that. She became violent. She was a violent drinker, and she was a binge drinker. You know, if it was in the house, she drank it until it was gone. You know, she was not a casual drinker, and she really turned demonic and,
oh, wow.
You know, beat my father. And,
your mother beat your father?
Oh, yes. Yes.
What are they, I just trying to get a picture in my mind. Are they the same size, or was she?
Now, my mom was pretty tiny, actually, at the time. But in that drunken state, and you know, a man who refused to, you know, respond in any way, you know, she was pretty brutal.
Wow.
But you know, you just brought up an interesting question, and I say that was a late bloomer when you asked me why I thought that was. You know, my father did give me scotch as a very young boy on multiple occasions. And I think in some way, perhaps I didn't take the alcohol for that. I don't know. It could go both ways, right? I mean,
sure.
But I think that there was sort of an aversion, because when I did discover hard liquor as a young adult in my late teens, early 20s, you know, I did have some funny moments of remembering childhood, and it was very difficult for me. So I, you know, did what all alcoholics do and drank my way through the feelings.
Right. Yeah. When in doubt, drink more.
Exactly.
Yeah. So did you find that you had an aversion to scotch in particular?
I had a funny relationship with scotch. It was a love-hate thing. There were times that I could drink it, and then there were other times that even the smell would make me, you know, feel sick to my stomach.
Right.
But even now, if I'm out to dinner and I see, you know, a Rob Roy or a Manhattan walk by me, I mean, I can smell it, and it still makes me, you know, get like chills, and not in a good way, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like when you were a child, and you talk about it openly in the book, that both your parents are abusive, but that first drink that you were given from your father, was that used as a precursor to the sexual abuse?
It was.
It was. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And then, you know, as I got older, you know, visits to my grandmother's house, she literally lived steps from a bar. And it was,
oh, man.
You know, my father taking me there and sort of showing me off to his friends. And it became, you know, don't tell anyone, but, you know, putting the glass of scotch on the bar for me. when I was what, eight or nine,
Oh,
and
just a little guy.
It's a funny thing that happened. It's
Very peculiar, yeah.
Yes.
Because I would imagine on one hand, it made you feel special to be like in that,
Sure.
Sitting at the bar, you have a drink, and everyone's cool. It's just strange to me that everyone would be cool with it, but I guess things are...
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, what the hell are they thinking?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Now, did the abuse happen every time he gave you alcohol?
No, it was, the abuse started with my dad when I was very young, before I started kindergarten. I was
Wow. Okay, so...
Yes, very young. And I think that, his using alcohol sort of became a, just another method of his smarminess, really. In his way that he sort of treated me as his special son. My father was somebody who just drove home that constant story of, father-son bond that couldn't be broken, and really manipulated that into meaning, into keeping secrets and to never telling.
Right. And what did your father do professionally?
My father fixed cars. He was an auto body man.
Wow. So, because that's typically like a manly man environment, right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons why I felt I needed to tell my story and to write the book was to really show that the sexual abuse that I suffered as a kid was not like this scary man lurking around in the ski mask. This was my father.
Right.
Someone that is very funny, that everyone likes. It's a very likable guy, and and on the outside and to the world, we were perceived as a perfect family. So, it's one of the reasons why I felt it was so important to tell my story, is to shed some light on the realities of who perpetrators can be.
Right. Yeah, that is so important because, when I remember growing up, I would hear things like, if you're being abused, keep telling until somebody believes you. And I would always think, why wouldn't anybody believe?
Yeah.
Right.
And people don't want to believe it. They just don't.
And it's hard to wrap your head around the idea that somebody that everybody likes is capable of doing something like that.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And also in our society, somebody who is an abuser is not only just a pariah, but it's like an acceptable form of public stoning. You know what I mean? It's like people, you hear it all the time. Like, if I found out that my child was being abused, I would go out and kill that person.
Sure.
So it must make it very difficult for kids or people that are abusers to get help. Like, I know that's like a stretch, or maybe I don't know how that sounds, but in our society, it doesn't seem to be any sort of recovery process, which makes it difficult for the victims to out their abusers. Is that a fair statement?
It is, and I was thinking about something you said earlier, and I did tell once, in second grade, I told a teacher that not about my father, but I very much alluded to the fact that my parents fought a lot and that things were very unsettling at home, and that teacher, of course, did what she needed to do and reached out to my parents.
Oh, shit.
And yeah, it was bad, and I was told and reminded that night to never ever tell. And I think it was second grade. And, I got the talking to. My sister and I were pulled aside by my dad and said, never, ever tell. You've got parents that love you. We're here for you. And there's nothing that we can't, fix together. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And I never told again. That was like, I understood. My mother didn't speak to me. And that was like the worst, worst punishment. Ignore me. And, but in terms of abusers and perpetrators in society, it is an age-old question. Is like, where do they belong? Like, what do you do with them? I have no idea. It's a painful topic.
I know. So do you feel that as someone who is abused, do you still feel that anger towards your father, or was there a period of time where you were so angry that the idea of like him being killed in some way, whether it's like the death penalty or go to jail and being killed.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean, and yes, I did. I spent a big chunk of time not knowing and not trusting that I wasn't going to do something to my dad.
Oh wow.
I really sort of dwelled in that much hatred for a period, and it was tied to some of the worst years of my drinking, and I really struggled with what how to process and how to deal with all of that anger,
Right.
But I didn't, and I'm very grateful that I did, and I have found forgiveness, and I have let go of that hate 100%. That did not happen until after I got sober. I was sober a few months before I even started to venture into dealing with that. But that being said, I also want to make it clear that while I found forgiveness, I also have nothing to do with either of my parents. And that has been one of the most powerful gifts I've given myself, was to go against the grain and say, the grain of society, and say, no, yes, I understand that they are my parents, but it is best for me and my survival to not have any contact or anything to do with them.
Absolutely. Did you feel some pressure at some point to have a relationship with them?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when the way it unfolded is I asked for some time. As my memory was coming back and things were becoming more clear, I said in an email I was asking for some space from my parents, and I truly worried that my father was going to kill himself, because I spent most of my life with my father using that as a threat against us.
Wow.
Would you miss me if I was gone? Would you miss me if I killed myself? I just want to die. If I don't have your love. I mean, it was very much that.
God.
So even asking for some space was painful for me. And then as time went on and I started to understand how I was freeing up myself, I knew that a relationship with them was just impossible for me.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. Wow, I'm not even sure which way to go with this, because there's so many questions, right? So tell me, so how long have you been sober?
This is sort of interesting. I have the book is just coming out, and the actual release date is February 20th, which is the exact date of my 5th year of sobriety.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So on February 20th, I'll have 5 years.
I'm writing that down, because I'm going to reach out and say happy 5 years.
Thank you so much.
Maybe I could even get it out on the 20th. Wouldn't that be fun?
I mean, it's been uncanny how this whole process has worked.
Listen, I don't know if this was the thing that scared you a lot or whatever. I would imagine it's a scary process to go public with your story. But how the universe conspires for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you found that like magical things are happening?
Yeah. I mean, when I definitely spent some time, in sobriety, I really questioned myself a few times. Was I doing the right thing? Should I tell this story? I still felt that instinct to protect my parents, and that was hard for me. And and I sought some advice by someone that I respect, and I understood that it becomes that whole idea of protecting one person as opposed to helping many. And when it was presented to me like that perhaps my book could be of some help to other survivors, that's when I started to shift my thinking. And I understood that the idea of fear, as it played in my idea of not wanting to publish, was very old. It was very, very old. And it was falling into the old family system of not speaking out and not telling.
Right. Yeah. That feeling of shame and secretiveness.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that keeps us quiet. Occasionally I'll be hearing stories from people, and I'm just in awe that some people are able to survive their childhood.
Yes.
Right. So you survived your childhood, and I think you telling the story, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, that, for years to come, that this will help an untold number of people process their situation. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
I want to go back a little bit. So you did mention that you have a sister. Is she older than you, younger than you?
She is. She's 6 years older than me.
Okay. Did she also experience the same kind of abuse?
No. I say no because she has told me no.
Ah.
Yes.
Which doesn't mean no.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I I take what she says to heart, and she has been incredibly supportive of me. She still has a relationship with my parents, so I tread lightly, with that. I'm amazed, honestly, I am amazed that my sister and I have managed to maintain a relationship through some very, very painful and difficult years. We've navigated it carefully, and it's really it's really lovely that we still have a relationship. That really started because I have one niece that I adore, and so the commitment became to maintain a relationship for my niece, and I'm very grateful that it has all survived intact.
It's amazing how children can be so healing and
Yes,
cohesive to families.
exactly.
Okay, so you're taking your sister at her word, and okay, so let's go back a little bit to your mom, because you spend a lot of time struggling with the issues and anger around your mom, because I would think that to some degree there would be anger towards your mother for allowing abuse to happen in your house, whether she was conscious of it or not. Do you think she had any awareness of what was going on?
I'm one of those people that thinks that how could she not have known? She's a mom. She was my mom. However, that being said, my mom was so consumed with various degrees of mental illness that were undiagnosed during my childhood. She was not diagnosed till much later in life, but she was so checked out that I think that even if she knew, it was a knowing not knowing situation.
Sure.
And I think her biggest concern was herself, and so I think that she easily could have moved past things that she, may have seen as odd or disturbing, and maybe chose not to see for what it was.
Right. Yeah. What kind of mental illness was she eventually diagnosed with?
Borderline personality disorder, psychotic depression with schizophrenic tendencies.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, pretty heavy duty.
Yeah, that is heavy duty.
Yeah.
It makes me kind of wonder why your dad married her.
Well, yes, I know. And I had this funny thing happen where I discovered my father's yearbook in this box of family photos I had, and I saw what my mother wrote to him. And I think that my mother was 16 when they met.
Wow.
And she made reference to her temper. And, I'm not sure how you put up with me. I will never truly understand the bond that they formed and how they ended up in this relationship that was so fraught with stuff. But, whatever it was, they certainly had a bond.
That's crazy. And they're still together?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. And so are they about the same age?
Yes, they're in their early 70s.
Their early 70s. Okay. So, wow. So they got together when they were just kids when they got together.
Exactly.
I wonder if she just wasn't like it seems like mental illness progresses like alcoholism does.
Right.
But maybe she wasn't that crazy in the beginning.
Who knows?
Who knows? And do you have an awareness of what your grandparents were like? Do you have a relationship with your grandparents?
All of my grandparents are now gone. Okay. My mother's parents, my grandfather on my mother's side was diabolical. He was not a nice man.
Oh,
and,
okay.
And I don't know much about my mother's childhood. What I do know was not good and painful, and certainly verbally abusive, probably physically abusive as well.
Physically abusive, do you think, like in the sense of like he beat his kids? Because that was very common then.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I know a few instances my mother shared with us, but never any specifics. My father's side of the family, there was a lot of addiction going on. There was a lot of alcoholism, and it sort of was a little bit of a perfect storm, I think.
Sure. Well, the reason I ask is because, water tends to seek its own level, right? And so clearly they're both batshit crazy. But oftentimes, as we're growing up, whatever love felt like in the household is what we tend to attract as adults. Like we recreate our family of origin. So I was just curious, right. It kind of makes sense, right? Your grandparents we're all crazy. And so when your mom met your dad and vice versa, you know, that's probably what love felt like to them, right? It felt crazy.
I suppose so. I mean, I'm very grateful that that I did not repeat that, and I ended up in a very healthy, communicative relationship.
Yeah, well, listen, you did the miraculous. You broke the chain, right? And that is the hope of recovery in my eyes, is that, and thank God we have access to so many healing ideas and, 12-step groups and therapy and all that stuff, that we're the ones that break the chain, right? Yes. Addiction and this cycle of abuse and things doesn't have to continue.
Right, exactly right.
So is that what you did as far as recovery goes? Because listen, we all know that alcohol is a symptom of a deeper problem. So from all the things that I've read, it looks like you did a lot of therapy and 12-step
yes.
recovery work. And because this is a recovery podcast, could you walk me through a little bit about like maybe the early days of your recovery? Like, how did you...
Sure.
Like I think you mentioned you were 12-step oriented. Like, how did
yes.
you start the road to recovery?
Well, I've been I have a long-term relationship with my therapist. I've been working with her for quite a few years. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't know was that at the time, she has a pretty strict policy of not working with active alcoholics. Mm-hmm. And I later found out that she made an exception for me because she believed from the start that I would find my way into sobriety when the time was right for me. She also understood how I used alcohol as medicine to deal with flashbacks especially.
Oh, wow.
So finding my way into sobriety, getting to a meeting for the first time, it was a game changer for me. It was the first time that I ever publicly acknowledged what happened to me as a child. This is before I even thought of writing the book. Mm-hmm. And I included it as part of my story, and I was so amazed at how many people came up to me and said, "Me too."
Oh,
and
God.
And it was a deep and profound moment for me that I felt all of a sudden meetings for me felt even more comforting, knowing that I wasn't alone in my addiction and I wasn't alone in my childhood experience. Mm-hmm. So I very much felt at home there and continue to.
Yeah, it sounds like you were so isolated for so long. And then when you go to meetings and you find that fellowship and you realize that you're not alone, I don't know about you, but like for me, that's such a healing experience. Like I feel that connection finally with something that had been missing. Did you find that like you were connected to these people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah.
And did you do the whole traditional process of getting a sponsor, doing 90 meetings in 90 days, and that whole thing?
I'm an old school guy. I did it the very traditional way, and I joked that my goal was to become an old timer. So yes, I remain committed.
Very good. So you got a sponsor, and how did you go about selecting a sponsor?
I bounced around a little bit, and thankfully somebody reached out to me and offered to be a temporary sponsor, because I should be clear that I was I did not get to meetings close to where I live. In the beginning, I actually got on a train and went down to New York City to go to meetings because I didn't want to see anyone that I knew. I was afraid, which gives me a laugh now, and now I chuckle. Because, of course, once I did find local meetings, of course, the fellowship and the reward was in these relationships with people that I had no idea who were in recovery.
Right.
And that was great. So I was approached by somebody who offered to be a temporary sponsor, and that ended up becoming a permanent sponsor.
Okay. And I'm not quite sure how to ask this. Typically, like, the men work with the men and the women work with the women, but when you are a gay person, does it matter, or are there rules around that? Can you walk me?
Yeah, I've had both male and female sponsors. I mean, certainly you can say, men sticking with a man if I'm a gay man and I'm going to work with.
Right. Like, how does that work?
That could present a problem.
Right.
Thankfully, it hasn't.
Okay.
But I'm in terms of that, I'm a firm believer in going where the energy feels right, and I just base it on that. I look at it. I don't look at gender at all. I just don't.
Okay. Now, I understand that the reason is that because, people get like, have you ever heard the term trauma bonding?
No.
I love that term. I just recently heard it and I was like, yes, that's what happened. And I think for me as a woman, whenever I have confided in a man and started, I don't know, confessing and bonding, there is that closeness that can very easily slip into an intimate relationship, like a sexual relationship. And so I think that's why, and for other reasons too. I know, listen, 12-step programs are, as they say, not the hotbed of mental health. So, right? So you don't so you need to be careful with these people is what I'm trying to say. But it sounds like you had a very positive experience. How long did it take you to get through all 12 steps?
The first, I set out a mission for myself to do it in the first year, and I did.
Okay.
And then subsequently have gone through a different fits and starts, again. But I think, remaining engaged for me is critical. It just is, it's just important.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've heard this, but they say that if you work the steps will work you. Did you find that to be true in your case?
I did. I found, I didn't have a clue. Another funny thing, sort of going back to the book for a minute and how it related, we had, my mom had a magnet on her refrigerator growing up with the Serenity Prayer on it.
Oh my goodness.
And she used it to justify her behavior, and it became this thing, where it just, she felt so justified in the things that were out of her control, or she perceived to be out of her control. And so in the beginning, I couldn't even hear that. I couldn't even hear the Serenity Prayer. I just couldn't. So, I just became willing. I was so desperate, and I was I had an ugly bottom. I was really living in misery. And so I just became willing. And I think that that's what allowed me to sort of work through them all, is even though I didn't know or necessarily understand or even trust sometimes, I just remained willing to, lean on the people that have been doing it longer than me.
And that's amazing that you were able to trust those people, considering the enormity of the trust issues that you must have been wrestling with. So, and listen, we didn't talk any about your concept of a higher power. Can you maybe walk me through, like, what kind of a concept of a higher power you had as a kid, and maybe how that has evolved over time? Yeah,
growing up, we were, I was brought up Lutheran, and was very, very, very connected to the church. And until my mother, no surprise, had a fight with the minister, and we were forbidden to go back.
Oh, forbidden, banished from the church.
I was, and for me, the church was like one of the first places that offered sort of some respite and some sort of like safe place. Right. So it was very hard for me. So I really, I felt very jaded about any organized religion, and I bounced in and out once or twice in my, early or my late teens, trying to reconnect with the church. Did not work for me, and I married my husband is Jewish, so I started to understand different traditions, and I'm somebody who just very clearly accepts the fact that there is something greater than me out there that I can rely on. That if I pay attention, there are certain signs that become clear to me that I can trust. But I'm not a fan of any organized religion for me.
Got it. Yeah, but it does sound like, I dare call it a sense of spirituality, maybe.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of reconnecting to my own idea of God has been a real gift in sobriety as well, because I really thought that was done for me. I just didn't think that that anything else was gonna surface for me. I thought that I was really done with religion, with God, with all of it. Right. And that's been a nice shift.
Do you feel like you've separated religion from spirituality?
Absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so you get sober and then you went to therapy first and then
I did.
Oh, okay.
I did.
And can you walk me through a little bit? Was there a process to dealing with that anger so that you could get to forgiveness?
Yeah, sort of funny process. I'm sure I can say anything on this
Oh,
podcast.
please do. Yes, yeah.
So yeah, I will. So when I was really contemplating causing harm to my dad, I drove around with a baseball bat in my car
Nice.
for a long time, and instead of doing something that would put me in jail, I took out my revenge on some metal garbage cans,
Nice.
and it was extremely cathartic and really helped me start to shed a lot of anger. But that was just like one step in the process. I think that once I got sober and started understanding kindness for myself and shedding shame, that releasing the anger was really critical for me. And I leaned on my therapist. For me, I have an acupuncturist that is a healer that has worked with me for many years. That was some deep, profound work in moving some energy along, and I had a real shift there. So it was sort of again, leaning on the people that were closest to me. I referred to this as like my core team that hovers around me and keeps me in line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I just got this visual of you with a baseball bat hitting some garbage can. You were like out in public? I mean, were there witnesses to this?
No, I was home, and thankfully my house is very secluded. I was home, and it was a very difficult, challenging night, for many reasons, but it helped without me realizing that it was helping at the time. And
Yeah, that's amazing. Just moving. There's something about moving your body. You talk about acupuncture, but just getting that anger out, like physically.
Yes.
Had to be a way of resolving some of that.
Absolutely. It was.
And so, how long have you been in therapy? Obviously more than 5 years.
Yeah, I think that I'm coming up on 13 years.
On 13 years. Okay. I am really impressed with how you're able to speak about it, because you do seem like calm and at peace with it. Do you think the process of, and listen, I can't believe you wrote a book. I mean, you wrote 5 years sober. I mean, that's huge that you're 5 years sober, but I'm sitting at 23 years sober and I have yet to finish my book. So,
yeah. I mean, truthfully, I'll tell you that when I first sat down to start writing out just the very beginning, like the first couple of pages I wanted to get out like what actually happened, get the worst of it out.
Right.
And I had cravings, and all I wanted to do as I was reliving that stuff, all I wanted to do was drink and numb out. So I put it down for 6 months, and it was 6 months before I felt safe enough to actually start writing again. And it was very, very hard to relive all of that without drinking. I can't even tell you. I mean, just how hard that was.
Yeah. And now that it's all out, do you feel even stronger?
I do. I feel, this question or assumption that I'm asked most often is, it must have been cathartic to write the book. And truthfully, the writing was not at all cathartic. It was incredibly painful. Oh. And, to describe my experience and to have to come up with the words to describe that experience and sentence structure to describe that experience, that was really hard.
Yeah.
And, but, I stuck with it. And now that the book is done, and I actually held the book for the first time just on Friday. I just got my first copy on Friday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I definitely did feel very much put at ease in some way. Like there's this container now for the story, and it really feels more a part of my past than who I am now.
Yeah, I can hear the strength in your voice.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to applaud you for that, and to continue, on your recovery journey. I know it's going to help a lot of people. Tell me a little bit about what your ongoing recovery process is, because I know you're also involved with, is it RAIN?
Yes, RAINN is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. They're a national network that provides amazing support for survivors, any survivor of sexual violence. And I also serve on a board of an organization called Taking Back Ourselves that provides weekends for women in recovery from any form of sexual violence also. And that work is a big part of my ongoing process. And, and I'm a creative person, so if I'm working on an interior or working on a creative project, that's what really grounds me. That's a big part of who I am and what I do. And that continues to get redefined and changes. The more I can let myself slow down, because I'm not patient, the more I can let myself slow down and stay present, the better all aspects are for me, including my recovery.
Right.
Slower is faster is a message that my therapist has been saying to me for years and years and years, and it works.
That's really cool. And we'll certainly share those resources in the show notes. We are coming up on our time, and I appreciate all of you. Listen, I could talk to you forever. There's so much depth to this story.
Thank you.
That I really recommend that people just pick up the book and check it out, especially if this has been within your realm of experience. I think that people really get a lot of healing to just go through your recovery journey through this book. And typically how I wrap up is, since the podcast is called ODAT Chat, the One Day at a Time, do you have a daily process or a weekly process that you use to keep you sober in the long term?
I do meditate. So I would say that is important. And I also, I have a great sober network of friends that I remain in constant contact with.
Is that like you have daily conversation? Are you a texter or are you a caller?
I'm a total texter. Like, don't call me. I don't pick the phone. I'm a texter, and I've got like 3 or 4 people that it's like we check in, and it is I don't ever want to underestimate the power of that constant check in with other sober people.
Yeah, constant. Do you still go to meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How often do you go to meetings?
It depends. I'm certainly at my best if I get to at least 4. But it varies. It varies, and I'm laughing as I'm saying that because I'm like, yeah, okay, I can tell myself that sometimes it's 1 a week, and it's definitely not ideal. Yeah. But yeah, meetings are important.
Yeah, I mean, meetings are not recovery, right? That's an easy place to go to for connection and to be of service, and
there for the newcomer.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that. And then daily meditation. Do you sponsor other people?
I did in the beginning. I haven't lately, and my belief on that is that it'll happen when it's meant to be. I don't push it. I'm certainly make myself available. But yes.
Okay, but you are of support with the people that you're in constant texting communication with.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Do you meet with your friends in person, like not only just in text but in person?
Oh yeah. Coffee dates, standing dates. Usually involves a meal for me since I'm a I love food. So
nice. Well, listen, you're close to New York, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, we went to New York for the first time, and it was like being on a food tour. I have never had so much amazing food in my entire life.
It's incredible. And that's one of the other things I love about meetings also in the city is that they're so diverse. And I love that. I thrive on seeing an entire room of fresh faces. I just love that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, next time I go out there, I'll definitely look you up and we'll have to hit a meeting together. That would be awesome.
Let's consider it a date.
Okay, listen. Thank you so much, Larry, for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I really feel like this is going to be a very special podcast that will help many, many people. So thank you for being a guest on the podcast today.
It was my pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll certainly put links so that people can find you and access your book. And I look forward to checking in on you and seeing how things are going down the road.
Sounds good. Thank you, Arlene.
Great. You have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.